manhood.
Stefan, you were in the world of indie rock, okay, and there were a lot of men's men in that world, a lot of masculinity in that world, and you and Brian especially was blurring the lines of sexuality, very androgynous in that environment.
Yeah, it was in the middle of the 90s when Britpop was all the rage, and you know, a lot of the bands that were
lad and ladette culture.
Yeah, it's like they kind of rolled in off, you know, from the pub, you know, onto the stage, you know, with the guitars, with the Union Jack kind of thing, and we really didn't fit into that scene. And yeah, I mean, Brian, my singer, he was always confused as a woman, you know, and there was this kind of gender fluidity, and not wanting to be put into some kind of box of this is what, you know, you're supposed to be as a man, and just kind of exploring the shades of grey rather than, you know, the black and the white, the kind of binary view on gender.
Are you happy with the fact that you were able to do that in a pre-social media age, or are you envious that there wasn't social media around when you guys were at the very height of your fame? Because of the kind of questions you're asking, because in this age, of course, people can be much more insulting, much quicker, right to you.
I think we had a chance to make mistakes and kind of grow up in a relatively less pressurized scenario. We were very young when the band started, and you know, in your early 20s, you're still finding out who you are. And I think, you know, if social media would have been more active then, it probably would have been, you know, harder to kind of just, you know, kind of grow up and with kind of a freedom.
Did you encounter much homophobia?
I mean, I have, yeah, as a gay man, I have throughout the years, you know, I mean, even
But in the music industry, as the band, as Placebo?
Not that much, really, because, you know, the inherent in the industry is like the labels that they want to have a quote-unquote someone who is not a normal person. You know, they want them to be, you know, taking too many drugs, they want to be drinking too much, and they want them to, you know, look outrageous. And it's even... they want you to do it. I mean, the labels, they had drug dealers there. You know, they were kind of pushing it in front of you, and they were telling us, you know, go on live on TV and, you know, cause a scene. You know, so if you had an alternative sexuality, you know, back then, you know, that was better. It was a plus.
Right, that was a selling point. That was a USP for the band.
Yeah.
Right, okay. Last, definitely not least, Ted Hodgkinson is with us, the organiser, the curator-in-chief of the Being a Man Festival. Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
For people listening in right now, and please, you can keep texting us 85058. Is being a man's man something to be ashamed of in 2017? That's the question we've got for you, and we very much like, and Sarah would very much like you to get in contact with us and tell us what you think. Ted, what is the philosophy of the Being a Man Festival? Why did it come about in the first? We're not doing that part two. Stefan, is a gay man's idea of masculinity different to a straight man's idea of masculinity? Do the two words mean two different things?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I know within the gay world, you know, the physical appearance is of great importance. I mean, it's also in the straight world. But I guess there might be some kind of want to making up for the fact that you're gay, which for a long time has had connotations of being camp, of being feminine, of being weak, of being too emotional. All these kind of topics which have not been associated with being a man's man for a very long time. You know, I mean, even my dad was cracking homophobic jokes to me before he knew I was gay.
How did he cope with that? How did it affect his masculinity that his son was gay?
He's a very humble man, and he's a very soft-hearted man. I think he grew up in a farm in Sweden, you know, in the 50s and 60s, where it's all about going out and sort of plowing the fields, you know, in freezing temperatures, you know, and you didn't talk about your emotions. But he's a very sensitive person. But I think his conditioning from a young age just made him into this kind of really hard-shelled, and, you know, guy who was, you know, is all very career-orientated, and, you know, really had to show that you're strong and that you can hold your own. But then I guess when I came out, he kind of dropped a bit of that guard, and since then, I remember one of the first things he told me when I came out to him. He was like, "Well, hey, Stefan, I'd rather you give me one hug too many than one too few." So he's been great.
That's an amazing thing Scandinavian men as well, they do tend to feel as though they have a direct link to Vikings. So their idea of masculinity is, and Scandinavians are taller on average. I mean, I used to date a girl from Stockholm, and you go to Sweden and you walk around Stockholm, you're like, oh my gosh, this is like a race of superhumans. Just kind of wandering around. So is there a different Scandinavian idea of masculinity, of what a man's man is? Because you guys you're heavy drinkers as well, right?
Yeah, I guess.
I'm really being horribly negatively stereotypical about Swedes. They are really cool people.
Well, that's kind of, when you talk about being a man's man, and a man, you kind of start to think about stereotypes. I think we should stop thinking about man and woman. It's like we're all human beings. That's ultimately what we should get to, so we don't sort of sit and talk about sort of boxes of people, But yeah, I suppose in Sweden, people just do not speak very much. It's so cold, and people live far apart from each other, and the whole thing about if you get within 2 feet of a Swede, they get stressed out. It's like, get away from me, this is my personal space. So, I guess it's kind of the cold,
right?
Kind
okay.
of hard.
Ted, Sarah, I know you got a caller. We'll just wait 1 second.
The news lately, that I think is what people describe as toxic masculinity.
Well, it's interesting because at the moment we're kind of discussing this through the prism of heterosexuality, but the Kevin Spacey allegations, of course, have put the light on the homosexual community and those same issues about power and how men interact with each other. Has that made you think at all, with those allegations against Kevin Spacey, about how men act towards each other? You were in a position of power in the 90s in a huge band, playing to thousands of people, impressionable, your teenagers, etc., etc. Do you feel that, and this is a question for all of us, is that our behaviour, the way we were when we were younger, was something we can look back on and go, yeah, okay, I'm comfortable with that?
I think you have to, in some ways, cut yourself some slack, to a certain extent, because we all make mistakes. And, like we were talking about, it's about changing behavior, and that's one of the more difficult things to do in life, because we get stuck in a certain way of seeing things, if it's because of the way that our parents see the world or society.
Do you think the allegations against Kevin Spacey has made there to be a conversation within the gay community in the same way that heterosexual men are having to have that conversation post-Weinstein allegations? Yeah,
I think so. Perhaps, the homosexual community talks about it more because they're confronted by the idea of what is a man and masculinity, on a day-to-day basis. For example, if I'm out walking, I can clock someone who's homosexual because there's a certain, look in the eye that I can tell, because throughout the years we've marginalized and it's been criminal to, and illegal,
Some parts of the world it still is.
It still is, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it's something that's much sort of closer to home, on a more day-to-day basis. And, we're talking about shame as well, and I think it's very very close to home. People walking around thinking that they're not man enough.
Right.
This whole thing about being feeling ashamed because men being too macho, but it's also the other side of being ashamed of not being man enough.
Right. Yes.
And then walking around with that, and certainly for me coming out, there was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, and that's something that I still deal with. And
who were you letting down to feel that guilt? Who did you feel like you were?
I guess it's just the fear of not being liked, the fear of not being accepted, the fear of worrying about what people think about you.
Yeah, and actually that fear, even though it's specific to your sexuality, that feels like something that gets expressed a lot at the